within true crime, like I'm very curious because as mentioned before, working in a news environment, right? Like I think it's very easy for us to become desensitized. How do you kind of like prevent yourself from being kind of like emotionally overwhelmed with this field?
As I became an AP associate producer and I got my individual stories, that's when it started getting a little bit harder.
All right, so this is episode 3 of We Are Human in New York, and I'm with Larissa Hamblin.
Yes.
Diving in, you work for a documentary unit within True Crime.
Yes.
Is your department. Can you walk me through a little bit of like your day-to-day?
So every day, it always is a little bit different. Really... I wake up some days and I'm sitting in front of Premiere Pro all day long, and other days I'm flipping through scripts, and other days I'm going through a million different photos. So it's always a little bit different. But lately I just started a new episode. So I am just going through the script right now, laying everything, all the sound bites down on a timeline. And I just am making sure it all sounds good so far. And then my next step, which will be next week, I'll start laying down photos and video and sound effects and music and all of that fun stuff.
So everything, you compile everything into...
Everything you see is me.
Awesome. And how long does one episode normally take for you to kind of finalize?
Yeah, well, from start to finish, each episode normally takes, I would say, about 3 months.
Wow.
Really, it could start up to a year beforehand, but I count like 3 months for my time, not the episode's life. The episode's life could take about a year. But for me, it's around 3 months by the time I get the script and we do edits and I do my rough cuts. We have craft edit and final craft edit. And
yeah, of course.
A million different steps.
And you have to have a lot of pairs of eyes, to watch and like
so many
proofread.
It goes through like 20 different pairs of eyes.
Oh my god,
it's a lot.
That's intense. That's why it takes so long.
That's why it takes
like,
so
actually,
long.
Can you fix this and adjust this also?
Oh yes, especially when you start feeling so passionate about your project, you just want to start nitpicking and change like little effects and switch a photo to like an inch to the side, and it's just a million different things. But yeah, you have to just cut the cord sometimes.
No, one thing that I've learned when I started taking photos was kind of having to really trust your intuition especially with the sound bites. And I think that's why it was very fun and kind of natural for me to cut a lot of these interviews that I've been doing with the podcast, because you kind of already know like what is it that you want and what is unnecessary,
right? And
having to make those tough calls of like, this is good, but is this going to be like the maximum like reward or the most impacting?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we go through that all the time, especially with script writing. Sometimes the script doesn't seem like that much, but when you go to lay it out in video, you're like 30 minutes over your time.
Right. Oh my god.
So you have to start deciding like what you're going to keep and what you're going to toss. And I feel like when you get super passionate about your stories, you want to keep everything, because everything seems interesting and important. So cutting is really hard. I usually have an intern like watch it, and I'll be like, what part was boring to you? Like what dragged on too long? Like what parts seemed confusing or whatever. That's usually how we have to do it. Otherwise we get too passionate and we want to keep everything.
Yeah. And is there someone also like, is it all sound bite or like driven, or is there like a narration also, like with someone doing like a voiceover?
It depends. My last 2 episodes didn't have any narrator, but the one I'm working on right now does. Okay. So it's mostly sound bites, very interview heavy. Yeah. And then we'll also supplement with affiliate material. Of course. But so for some stories, it's just harder. So we have to add a narrator, especially when it comes to like timelines. Timelines can be really tricky. So it's good to have a narrator really just like spell it out for people. Otherwise it can be pretty confusing. So it depends.
So within true crime, like I'm very curious because as mentioned before, working in a news environment, right? Like I think it's very easy for us to become desensitized, and it's not intentional, right? It's just that we're exposed to so much information, a lot of tragedies.
Absolutely.
And so how do you kind of like prevent yourself from being kind of like emotionally overwhelmed with this field?
Yeah, it's honestly, I didn't start thinking about that until like 2 months ago, and I just had my 2-year mark at the company.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, it's to start off, I mean, you get so excited. I mean, I started this job as a PA, and I was just excited to have a job. I just graduated college, and I got this opportunity. I was like, this is great. This is so fun. And you start out, at least where I did, I was a little bit separate from the content. I was helping, giving hands for like different bits and pieces, but I wasn't invested in the stories.
Yeah.
But as I became an AP associate producer and I got my individual stories, that's when it started getting a little bit harder, because I mean, one of my stories that comes to mind is it was a story of 3 people who were kidnapped and murdered. And they were decapitated. Wow. And they were dismembered. And we had all the photos. And I mean, the sad part is people want to see photos, but you can't show everything on TV.
Yeah.
So my job was to go through all the photos and pick which ones can be blurred, which ones are not too gruesome, which can actually be aired. And it's so hard. But it comes to a point where at the end of the day, you have to just separate that, like your job is separate than your life.
Yeah.
And I think it's not necessarily that I get desensitized as it is I just compartmentalize.
Right. Okay.
I feel like that's like the difference, because there's definitely some stories that stick with me.
Yeah.
And then others, I try to keep in their little box in my brain and just like push it back there. But I think it's important though to at least feel like a little bit of it, just because then I think you do better work and you do more justice for the person.
Yeah.
Because especially in this field, it can just be so tabloidy. It can be so just almost rude to the person who passed if it's not done well.
Yeah.
So for me, I want to make sure that like I do honor by the people who have passed, and we work with the family members a lot. So I want to make sure that they're happy too, because I'm not going to use their interviews and then make them seem like, idiots. So I think it's just about compartmentalizing and using some of it in a positive way.
Yeah. I like when I started at the new station, I think I dealt with a lot of that for the first 6 months. I was very like, what is going on? Like, this is a very big adjustment. I went from doing sales at AT&T to like working in like a news station,
Yeah.
And there was one time like I had to like call my mom because I was like, this is so emotionally like overwhelming. And the one story that I always remember, that I always like get frustrated or hurt about, I guess, is there was a kid that was like riding his bike from school, I think, on the sidewalk, if anything, and the car like pulled out and just didn't see him and like hit him. And I always think of like the most like that specific detail of the fact that the kid even like had a helmet and everything. Like there was nothing going against his experience for it to turn out the way that it turned out. And I remember just being extremely bummed about it, because at the time he was my youngest brother's age. And so I was just like, what the hell, like this happens, and this happens every day to so many different people in different ways. And it became very difficult to separate work from like the emotions. And then eventually, like after around those 6 months, like I had to just kind of adapt and just I'm here to do a job, and let me just get the job done. But over time I've become more aware of like, okay, like I can't really be desensitized also. Like I have to try and show some empathy. I have to try and, like you mentioned, like just allow some of it to simmer in, so that way you can kind of do the job justice and tell the story like in a just way. And it's our duty, like in a live news environment, which you said you want to get back into, despite it being soul sucking. They say that journalists and all those people that work in news, that like we're masochists because we just enjoy the pain, the rush,
insane deadlines, and the terrible stories that we have to deal with.
All the last minute changes. But that is what you're saying is kind of next for you, like later down the road. You want to get back into that because your major was in print digital.
So I'm very far from that, but Print is such it's evolving field. I hate when people say it's a dying field because it's not.
No,
at the end of the
changing.
day, yeah, it's absolutely changing. And my minor was in writing and rhetoric. I was fully prepared to like go write online, and then opportunities change.
Of course.
And that's one thing in news. Like you just have to roll with the punches. Like as much as you may think you want something, you just have to accept whatever comes your way, learn with it, grow with it, and then if that's still not what you want to do, you just move. But like you just have to say yes to opportunities. But yeah, I quickly realized that printed digital was not exactly what I wanted to do. I love working in TV. I love it so much. And I didn't plan on doing docs even for this long at all. It was just an opportunity.
Yeah, of course.
But it's only been 2 years. So like a 3-year mark, I feel like is like a
That's
good point to like actually kind of evaluate where I'm at, see if I'm happy and what I really want to do. But yeah, going back to live news would be really fun. I love the fast pace, but something that I also really love about it is like you go there, you work for the day, and you don't bring the stories home with you necessarily. And I say that only because in docs, like I work on the same story for months at a time.
Yeah, exactly.
So I go home and I'm thinking about, okay, let's do this, let's do that, I want to change this. It feels like my brain is always on it. Whereas with live news, it's like you go, you prep, you do the broadcast, and then you go home. And then tomorrow's the next day, and you figure out as it goes, but you don't necessarily bring the work home with you. And that's something I miss a little bit, because this could be very hard.
No, yeah, that's super interesting, because at least where I was working, I felt like sometimes my job became a little bit of my identity. Like, especially at least the reporters, like, the journalists that were there, like, they have so many calls throughout the day. They have that editorial meeting in the mornings, and then like some of them will work a night shift, so they still have to be on that call at 10 a.m. and still come in at 2:30, work till 11:30, so it's like an all day kind of thing. But I'm sure different stations are also different, and they have a lot more like staff. We were a little short staffed. I don't know if I could say that, but it doesn't matter. I'm not there anymore. We were definitely short staffed.
That hurts though. When you're short staffed, it hurts.
Oh my god.
You feel it every single day in everything that you do because the pressure is so immense.
And it's like their solution is like, there is no solution.
Yeah,
just
there's
do
no
it.
Solution. You just have to. It has to get done, so you got to do it, and you worked so much harder than you need to be.
Yeah,
we've all been there, news.
I cannot even imagine. But like going back, like, oh my god.
Yeah.
But I mean, so I think that's interesting that like you can kind of leave that stuff back over there, at work.
Yeah. And
kind of separate your life. That's a good way of having like a good work-life balance though too, which is important.
It is really important.
I think that over the last year, people have been able to understand that a lot better, or become more aware of how important it is.
Yeah.
And working from home has made it kind of easier. Like people have realized, like, hey, like we don't need to be over here like 10 hours out of the day. And especially I think working or living, in New York, some places like the commute is already like 30 minutes to an hour.
Oh yeah. And
you work 8 hours, maybe 9 hours because you have to take a break.
Right.
Like you're out of the house for almost 10 to 11 hours out of the day.
No, it's absolutely true. Which is so funny you say that it's easier, because I actually felt the opposite. I felt that it was harder to keep a work-life balance, because even though I wasn't commuting, I felt like I was just working longer because my desk is right where I live. Like, it was just so hard for me to say, okay, I'm going to step away from this today, and that's going to be that. Like, I would just leave my computer on, and I would answer emails all night long. Like, and I'm literally 3 feet away from my couch, so I'd be watching a movie, I'd hear the ding, and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go answer the email. It was so much harder for me to, like, really stop it.
Yeah.
And going back to the office, I told you earlier that I had just gone back this past week. I find that, my commute is 30 minutes now, which for anywhere else in the world probably seems like, wow, that's a while. This is the shortest I've ever had to commute to work.
Nice.
When I first started, it was an hour and a half for me there and an hour and a half home. So that was 3 hours a day.
Jesus.
I felt that one. I felt that severely. But now it's only 30 minutes, but like it's so great because I feel like I go there and I can leave work there and then come back home. And that's something that I'm not great about when I work from home. And my hours run too much. And I'm hourly too. I don't even count half the hours that I actually put in just because if I'm just answering emails, I don't feel like I can actually like be like, I worked an hour even though I just answered 2 emails, you know?
No, yeah.
So it just bleeds. It just bleeds.
No, I would do the opposite. I was like, we were here, we had to drive all the way, like I would count the hours that we would drive, like when we had to drive to Tampa and like Miami sometimes.
Well, I think that's fair.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
I'm working.
Yeah, it's work. It's for work.
You know?
Yeah, absolutely. And then hopefully they paid for your gas too.
Yeah, they gave that. We had a card for the gas.
Good.
So going into like seeking information on social media or like in media in general, like you know, I think that one thing that has been also changing and people are becoming more aware of is like one, using social media as a way to kind of like spread information, inform people, and like coming from like a media background, you know, like I'm sure that those are things that may pop into your head, like, you know, when we're hearing about something or like something just happened, like it's breaking news, like verifying what exactly happened, what sources are these things coming from, and then also like resharing stuff, because I've fallen victim to being exposed to so much that I'm like, this is kind of overwhelming. Like I don't even know, like if I share something, like is this even like beneficial to someone? Is this really like, for example, like, you know, any major event that has happened, like people already kind of know about it.
Yep.
So like resharing something, like what is it actually doing, you know? And so I've always, for me in my experience, have preferred to kind of just shed light in a different way. And so I typically end up not talking about something that is so heavy. And then once in a while, obviously we have to like address those kind of things. But, you know, when things like that happen, how has that like affected like the way you seek information, the way you share information and inform friends of yours? Because I wonder, you know, because you like work in media, like do people kind of reach out to you for like what's going on? Do you know what's going on?
Yeah. I mean, it's the classic rule in college where for one piece of news, look for 3 different sources. And you run the risk of none of those being correct, you know, but hopefully you'll at least see some general patterns in the stories. You know, maybe someone says, you know, say it's like a guy is, you know, fleeing from cops, you know, he just like shot up a store or whatever, and you can like look through, you know, one story might say he's wearing a red shirt, next might say blue, next might say blue, well then it's probably blue. And that's a very terrible example, but like I always just try to read as much as I can, and I feel like the hard part is that when news is coming in that's significant or really important or at least intriguing to you, you want to get to like the brass tacks. You just want to get in, you want to know what's going on, and as much as you want to trust one source, it's just not always the case. So it just takes time. I read as much as I can, and then if I don't share really. I should, but I definitely run the risk. I think there's a pressure though when you work in news to like make sure you share things very correctly. Otherwise, you know, we're fake news and all of this stuff.
Oh god, that's another rabbit hole.
Yeah. Well, maybe hold off. I don't know. But like, there's so much pressure though. You know, there's so much pressure to be right all the time. And at the end of the day, we're people just like anyone else.
Exactly.
You know, and we're passionate about this, but I'm not going to know everything. But I'll do my best to try and understand as much as I can. But definitely reading. I like to talk about things with friends that are significant. Just, you know, I have friends who are in news as well, so we talk. But I probably should post more. But I follow my professors on social media, so they're like a really good source of information. Like, okay, so if I do share, I'm usually like repost.
Well, you mentioned like the fact that like, you know, we're human and, you know, mistakes are made and stuff. And so I'm also very curious of like your take within like biases in news.
Yeah.
Because I know that that's very like taboo or like a controversial thing because we have like 2 completely different like opposing sides whenever we watch like the major news networks. And that's why I've always been a fan of like local news because they're a lot more like driven by the community and they're just informing a small like neighborhood or smaller like county or anything like that. So you're kind of like more, you're more exposed to like things that are relevant to you and your area.
Absolutely.
Versus like major networks can really get into just like commentating.
Yeah.
And one thing, you went to UCF, right?
I did.
Did you ever have Brunson?
I love him. He was one of the professors.
Yeah, Brunson is really cool. And one of the things that I learned from him, or that he always like that he mentioned, was like, you know, a journalist is like on the field and like there where the story is, getting the facts. They are with the people, the families that were affected, whatever. Versus like in major networks, a lot of times people are at their, you know, news studio and they're just giving opinions about stuff that they may be qualified to talk about or may not be qualified to talk about. I've seen it several times where people are like, oh, I need this person that knows about this. Oh, let's just get this guy. Like, he's kind of in that field. And it's like, what qualifications do you actually have to be talking about anything?
Absolutely.
Or, you know? And so with that being said, like, there is, I would say, like, biases in news. And like, I feel like even though we as journalists or people that work in media do our best to stay ethical and to kind of have moral ethics or you know, and just be as unbiased as we can, it still kind of happens because we have like our subconscious still like portrays like whatever it is that we feel.
Absolutely. I would also say that it is different on a local versus national level.
Yeah.
If you are looking for some information, you should go local. And if you're looking for, you know, other types of information, maybe you should go national and like look at like cable news networks. The thing I'll say though is that there are biases, and when you look at major news networks, they're political. You know, it's political at the end of the day. You don't go on Fox News because you want to, I don't know, hear about the weather or whatever, or expect to hear some local story. It's not going to happen. And the same with CNN. It's just not going to happen. But I do think they are really helpful in different ways. And I work for one of those major news networks, you know. I will be the first to say that it is not perfect. But I really do believe that you need to listen to everything, you know. And I think a lot of us, and I will say social media also plays a huge role in this.
Yeah, absolutely.
We like to surround ourselves with the information we want to hear. We want to surround ourselves with the voices that coincide with our own. But the hard part is like, you're not really learning that way, and you're not really getting the full perspective. And neither perspective could be wrong, neither could be right, but at least you get like a different side of the coin, because there are two sides of the coin. You know, if you only look at the heads, then you're neglecting the tails. And I'm not saying it's going to make you feel good, but you just have to. Otherwise, you're not getting the full story.
No, that's really good, actually. I like that you made that comment, because I've always considered myself to be very like open-minded, you know, like always curious about like, okay, this person is saying this and like this person is saying something else, like kind of being open to like all the possibilities of like of everything, because if not, then like you mentioned, you're on one path or whatever, you're not necessarily like growing or learning. And you don't have to agree with anything else like X, Y, and Z or whatever, but like as long as you can kind of like be willing to listen and like kind of process what they're saying, why they're saying it, like then you have a better understanding of like, okay, well, this is here and this is over there. It's at some point it's just a form of exhaustion, like when someone is so stubborn, and both parties can be very stubborn and clash, like there's never any, you know, what's it called, the conflict's never resolved. And so I think it's important to at least like, I don't have to agree with like what, you know, conservatives think,
no,
you know, whatever.
God, no,
but but like I'm not also going to be like, don't ever talk to me, get away from me, like you know what I mean, like, well, who am I to say that I can't say anything about that, you know?
You can't just listen to defend. You have to also want to listen to learn. And if you are only listening because you want to give your point of view, then that's all they're going to do too. And then you're literally fighting, you're hitting a brick wall. And you're both going to just exhaust yourself. And you're not learning anything. And a thought I was having was just that when you look, I mean, they're the two obvious, but when you look at, you know, CNN and Fox, they can both be telling stories that are true, but a lot of people might not want to hear the either, you know? And it's just say, let's like look at the president, you know? Say CNN is covering a story on him and then Fox covers something else. And CNN is maybe in a positive light and Fox is, you know, criticizing him. Well, just because you don't want to hear the criticism, and like, listen, they have some rough commentary, so does CNN. No one's perfect. But at least if you hear the story, you can do your own research into it and learn more about it. But like, you might not hear about some of the crap the president's pulling on CNN, but you might at least hear about it on Fox, and then you can, you know, do your own research and figure all of the, get rid of the nuances, to the meat of it. But it's still really important to listen to both. You know?
Of course. And that's the thing. There are so many like nuances with everything in life. So like nothing is ever, I think, black or white. Like,
no, absolutely.
You really have to allow yourself to do the work and to kind of figure out and break down things. And like, I think that helps a lot in all areas, you know, understanding like different forms of like spirituality and religion. Oh my gosh,
absolutely.
You know, everything. Yeah. And so I'm very big on like just, you know, be open and like listen and learn and just, you know, that's how you grow, that's how you change, that's how you go through different like life seasons, you know?
Absolutely.
And I just think it's all fascinating.
Yeah, I love people.
People are incredible. And they're very just like, I don't know, like wholesome. Like you can't I don't know how people can like look at others and just kind of exert, you know, hate or
like listen, I don't have to agree with everything that you say. There's this one girl who I was reading her blog post. She's like a professional writer and she has some really bad takes. Like she has some really bad takes, but it's so interesting. Like even just learning about the thought process of how she gets there, I'm like, interesting. Bad take, but like it's curious to see how you took 3 points and made that final decision based on them, whereas my decision would probably be like the exact opposite.
Yeah.
But like it's still really interesting just to like hear people's thought processes. Yeah, I think it's fascinating.
Because everybody has like a unique take on everything.
Yeah.
You know, and not only just politics, but just like life itself. You know, like how people set their boundaries for themselves, and we all set boundaries in a different way.
Yeah.
You know, spirituality, like anything. Like I'm always fascinated by that because I think that that's like what makes us human and, you know, allows us to learn from each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, especially in this political climate, I feel like it's everyone on one side hates the person on the other side, and I just think that's so damaging because they're your neighbors.
Toxic.
They're the people who serve you food at the restaurant. There's so much more to them. People are so much more than their political opinions, and I feel like that's really hard for some people to understand. Listen, if you're racist, I can't get along with you, but like there's some things that like I might not agree with on a certain policy. That doesn't make them a bad person, you know? I'm so tired of the pointing of fingers. Especially when it comes to news.
Nothing is ever going to get done that way. And or resolved.
Yeah.